So you want to join the army. You're brave, capable, ready to serve your country. There's just one problem. You're a woman, and women aren't allowed. The recruiters laugh at you. The officers turn you away. Society tells you war is for men, and your place is at home. Cooking, cleaning, waiting. So what do? You cut your hair. You bind your chest. You put on a uniform, deepen your voice, and show up again. And this time, they let you in, because now they think you're a man. This isn't fiction. This isn't a movie plot. This is documented history. Women have been disguising themselves as men to fight in wars for thousands of years. From ancient China to World War I, they picked up weapons, marched into battle, and bled alongside men, often without anyone knowing. Welcome to the untold story of history's cross-dressing soldiers. Let's begin. Before we dive into specific stories, let's address the obvious question: why? Why would women risk discovery, punishment, even death, just to fight in a war? The answer isn't simple. Some did it for patriotism. They genuinely believed in the cause and wanted to serve. Others did it for economic reasons. Soldiers got paid, and many women had no other way to support themselves or their families. Some were escaping abusive situations at home. Some wanted adventure, and some they just wanted to prove they could. But here's the thing. Almost all of them had to deal with the same brutal reality. Women weren't allowed in the military, not officially, not legally, not in most societies throughout history. Military service was considered a masculine duty, and more than that, a masculine privilege. It was tied to citizenship, honor, and social status. Women were excluded not because they couldn't fight, but because letting them fight would undermine the entire gender hierarchy. If women could be soldiers, then what did that say about male superiority? What did that say about women being the weaker sex? So women who wanted to serve had two options: give up or disguise themselves. Many chose the latter. And the disguise wasn't always that difficult to pull off. Military uniforms were loose and baggy. Hygiene standards were terrible. Soldiers didn't bathe regularly, so no one noticed if you avoided communal washing. Medical exams were often cursory or non-existent, especially during wartime when armies needed bodies fast. If you could pass as a young man, short hair, flat chest, deep voice, you could enlist. And thousands did. We know this because some were eventually discovered. They were outed when they were wounded, when they gave birth, yes, really, or when someone they trusted betrayed them. And when that happened, their stories were recorded, sometimes in military tribunals, sometimes in newspapers, sometimes in personal letters. These records have survived, and they prove that women warriors weren't just myths or legends. They were real. They fought, they bled, and history tried very hard to forget them. Let's start with the most famous example, Hua Mulan. Yes, the Disney character. Except she wasn't invented by Disney. She comes from a much older Chinese poem called The Ballad of Mulan, written sometime between the 4th and 6th centuries. According to the poem, Mulan's elderly father was conscripted into the army. He was too old and frail to fight, and Mulan had no older brothers to take his place. So she disguised herself as a man and enlisted in his stead. She served for 12 years, fighting in battles, earning promotions, becoming a respected soldier. And no one knew she was a woman. When the war ended and she was offered a government position as a reward, she turned it down. She just wanted to go home. Only when she returned and changed back into women's clothing did her fellow soldiers realize the truth. The poem ends with them being shocked. We served together for 12 years, and we didn't know Mulan was a girl. Now, here's the thing. We don't know if Mulan was a real person. There's no archaeological evidence, no official records confirming her existence. But the story itself reflects a real phenomenon. Women did disguise themselves as men in ancient China to serve in the military. In a society that practiced strict gender segregation and had mandatory conscription during wartime, it wasn't unthinkable for a daughter to take her father's place, especially if the alternative was letting an elderly or disabled man march to his death. And Mulan wasn't the only one. There are scattered references in Chinese historical texts to women warriors who fought in disguise. Some were discovered and punished. Others completed their service and returned home without anyone knowing. The fact that these stories exist, even as legends, suggests they were based on real experiences. Because people don't invent stories about women pretending to be men unless it's something that actually happened. So yes, Mulan was probably fictional, but the women who inspired her story, They were real, and they fought just as hard as any man. Fast forward to the 1860s, the United States is tearing itself apart in the Civil War. Over 600,000 men will die, and hidden among them on both the Union and Confederate sides are an estimated 400 to 750 women who enlisted in disguise. We know their names, we have their records. Let's talk about a few. Sarah Emma Edmonds enlisted in the Union Army as Franklin Thompson in 1861. She served as a nurse, a mail carrier, and even a spy, once disguising herself as a black man to infiltrate Confederate lines. Yes, she went undercover twice. She fought in multiple battles, including the First Battle of Bull Run. She only deserted in 1863 when she contracted malaria and feared that seeking treatment would expose her. After the war, she published a memoir, Nurse and Spy in the Union Army, which became a bestseller. She eventually received a military pension and was buried with full military honors. Jennie Hodgers enlisted as Albert Cashier in 1862 and served for the entire war. 3 years, she fought in over 40 battles, including the Siege of Vicksburg. After the war, she continued living as a man for decades. She worked as a farmhand, voted in elections which women couldn't legally do, and received a military pension. Her secret was only discovered in 1911 when she was injured in a car accident and examined by a doctor. Even then, her fellow veterans defended her. They testified that Albert Cashier had been a good soldier and deserved to keep his pension. She died in 1915 and was buried in her Union uniform. Loretta Janita Velasquez claimed to have fought for the Confederacy as Lieutenant Harry T. Buford. She said she fought at the First Battle of Bull Run, served as a spy, and was wounded twice. After the war, she published a memoir, The Woman in Battle. Historians have debated whether her story is true or exaggerated, but records confirm that a Lieutenant Buford did exist and did serve in the Confederate Army. Whether it was Velasquez or someone else, the fact remains, Confederate military records list a female soldier. These women weren't anomalies. Researchers have identified hundreds of documented cases. Some were discovered when they were wounded or killed. Doctors examining bodies found female anatomy and recorded it in medical reports. Some were discovered when they became pregnant because, yes, some had relationships while in disguise. Some were caught by suspicious officers and court-martialed, and some were never discovered at all. We only know about them because they revealed their identities after the war, often to apply for pensions. The punishments varied. Some women were discharged and sent home. Others were imprisoned briefly, then released. A few were publicly humiliated. Newspapers loved to sensationalize the girl soldier stories, often treating them as curiosities rather than serious combatants. But many of their fellow soldiers defended them. They'd fought bravely, they'd bled, they'd earned respect. Gender aside, they were soldiers. And yet, after the war, most of their stories were forgotten, erased. Because acknowledging that women had fought, and fought well, would have challenged the narrative that war was a man's domain. So history buried them. Until now, Europe had its own tradition of women warriors in disguise. During the Napoleonic Wars, several documented cases emerged of women serving in various armies: French, British, Russian, and Prussian. Nadezhda Durova is one of the most famous, born in Russia in 1783. She hated the restrictions placed on women. At age 23, she disguised herself as a man, enlisted in a cavalry regiment, and fought in the Napoleonic Wars. She served for nearly a decade, participating in major battles, earning medals for bravery, and rising to the rank of lieutenant. Her secret was eventually discovered, but by then she'd earned the respect of her commanders. Tsar Alexander I personally allowed her to continue serving under her real name, but still in disguise as a man. After the war, she wrote her memoirs, The Cavalry Maiden, which became famous across Europe. In Britain, there are records of women like Hannah Snell, who enlisted in the Royal Marines in 1747 before the Napoleonic era. But part of the same tradition, she served for years, was wounded in battle 12 times, including in the groin, and never revealed her identity until after she was discharged. She later performed in London theaters, appearing in her uniform and telling her story on stage. The public was fascinated. The military was embarrassed. Then there's Christian Davies, an Irish woman who disguised herself as Christopher Welsh and fought in the British Army during the War of Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1714. She enlisted to search for her husband, who'd been forcibly conscripted. She found him still in disguise and fought alongside him for years. She was wounded multiple times, captured by the French, and eventually had her identity revealed by a battlefield surgeon treating a groin wound. After the war, Queen Anne granted her a pension and praised her service. What's striking about these European cases is that many of these women were celebrated after their identities were revealed. They became minor celebrities. Their stories were published. They were given pensions, but this was only after the fact, and only because their stories fit a certain romantic narrative. Brave woman defies convention, proves her loyalty, earns respect. It was palatable because it was rare. If hundreds of women had been doing this regularly, the reaction would have been very different. The system would have cracked down. But a few exceptional cases, those could be romanticized, turned into tales of individual heroism, and then safely filed away as curiosities. Still, the records exist, and they prove that across Europe, for centuries, women found ways to fight. Even when the law said they couldn't, by the time World War I rolled around, 1914 to 1918, things had changed. Medical exams were more thorough. Record-keeping was more rigorous. Propaganda emphasized traditional gender roles, men as soldiers, women as nurses, or factory workers. It was harder to enlist in disguise. But some still tried, and a few succeeded. Dorothy Lawrence was a British journalist who wanted to cover the front lines. Women weren't allowed, so in 1915, she disguised herself as a man, obtained a uniform, and made her way to the trenches in France. She worked as a soldier for 10 days before the physical and psychological toll became too much. She revealed her identity to her commanding officer, expecting to be sent home. Instead, she was arrested and interrogated. The British military suspected she was a spy or a prostitute because clearly, no woman would do this just to report the truth. She was eventually released but forced to sign a document promising never to write about her experience. She tried to publish a memoir after the war, but the British government suppressed it. It wasn't published until decades later. In Russia, the situation was slightly different. After the 1917 revolution, the new Soviet government began experimenting with all-female combat units, so some women didn't need to disguise themselves anymore. But before that, during the final years of Tsarist Russia's involvement in World War I, there are records of women enlisting in disguise, particularly in rural areas where oversight was lax. One documented case is Marina Yurlova, who joined a Cossack regiment at age 14, disguised as a boy, and fought on the Eastern Front. She later wrote a memoir, Cossack Girl, describing her experiences. She was eventually discovered and discharged. But her account provides valuable insight into how young women navigated military life in disguise. World War I marked the end of an era. By World War II, women were being officially recruited into auxiliary and support roles. The need for secrecy and disguise faded. But that doesn't mean the earlier stories became less significant. If anything, they became more important because they proved that women had been fighting all along, long before any government officially allowed it. So there you have it. For thousands of years, across continents and conflicts, women disguised themselves as men to fight in wars. They did it for money, for love, for patriotism, for freedom, for adventure. They did it because they were told they couldn't, and they did it anyway. And history tried to erase them. Their names were left out of official records. Their stories were dismissed as anomalies. Their courage was minimized or romanticized into harmless curiosities. But the records exist. The names exist. Sarah Emma Edmonds, Jennie Hodgers, Nadezhda Durova, and hundreds more whose names we'll never know because they were never discovered, or their records were destroyed, or no one bothered to write them down. They fought, they bled. They proved that courage has no gender. And now, finally, we're starting to remember them. Not as curiosities, not as exceptions, but as soldiers. Because that's what they were.